Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with some more How to Command the Death Guard. In this series, we're going to take a look at every aspect of the Death Guard. So whether you're looking to get more out of your army or you're thinking of joining Nurgle's dirty protest, then there's something here for you. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the heavy support slot coming in rolling with the big Daemon Engines, but we'll also take a quick look at the dedicated transports and fortifications. I say plural, but there's only one of each of those. So let's dive in and take a look at primarily the heavy support slot. I don't think there's any better place to start than with the Death Guard's own heavy support specific to them, the Plague Burst Crawler. The Plague Burst Crawler does have brackets, as you would expect from many heavy support vehicles. So just to touch on how the brackets change, it does lose movement, it does lose ballistic skill, and it does lose some strength. The strength's probably not that relevant because it's only got a 6-up weapon skill. Very unlikely, with 4 attacks, very unlikely to actually push any attacks through. So the strength, largely irrelevant. But losing the ballistic skill matters, and losing the movement does matter, particularly because with only 4" on the bottom profile, it makes it really hard to push it up to the enemy and try and get them caught in the explosion, which, as it goes, is one of the more dangerous explosions, given that the rest are just your putrid explosion for 1 mortal wound. The Plague Burst Crawler, it can hurt your own units, so you want to get it away from those when it's nearly dead, but also it deals D3 to anything within 6. So if you can hit a good few of your opponent's units with that explosion, then of course that's going to be added value for you after it's dead. But besides that, to begin with, on its top profile, it has a 9-inch move, 6-up weapon skill, 3-up ballistic skill, 7 strength, 8 toughness, 12 wounds, 4 attacks, 8 leadership, and a 3-up save. It does also have a 5-up invuln from being demonic. So the base loadout that it says it's equipped with is with the entropy cannons. However, the model is 135 points with the plague spitters. It is 145 with the entropy cannons. So to compare them first, the plague spitters were a lot better in 8th and before Armour of Contempt. 12-inch range, assault D6, auto hits, strength 6, AP -1, damage 1, and is a plague weapon. Wasn't so bad in 8th, particularly if your opponent was coming towards you and was looking to swarm it. An overwatch from the plague spitters would have been very nice. However, a lot of things have changed since then, but also Armour of Contempt, it's only AP 1. Going down to AP 0 against those factions does suck. And with the rise of Chaos Space Marines now, they've certainly been buffed since the new Codex. I think it's fair to expect to come up against a certain amount of Armour of Contempt. And, you know, against any other profile, it isn't brilliant there either. The Entropy Cannon, by comparison, is 36-inch range, heavy 1. So again, you would have 2 of these either way around. So it's 2 shots on the heavy profile, 36-inch range, strength 8, AP -4, damage D3+3, and is a plague weapon. So yes, of course, it's far less shots. It's not going to be as good at dealing with a horde army. I don't think hordes are that common in the current meta, though, you know, I'm sure some people run them. But again, you'd have something like your fetid bloat drone there to deal with a horde unit. This is here to deal with the big threatening targets. And I don't think you can say fairer than the entropy cannon in that regard. It's a good range at 36-inch, though nothing too oppressive. They will still have to come forwards if they're targeting something on the far side of the board, line of sight permitting. But strength 8, the only downside is that, of course, a las cannon would be strength 9. With the new Chaos Space Marine Land Raider going up to toughness 9, you're only wounded on 5s or wounded on 4s if it's within contagion range. I'm not sure we'll see that many Chaos Space Marine Land Raiders, but I would certainly consider it with some armies. Particularly Iron Warriors, I think, would probably get some good use out of that. So it'll kind of suck if you're coming up against that, but bear in mind, that model is twice the points of this model. 2 of these against the Chaos Land Raider. I think I'd like my chances a little bit better. AP -4, fantastic, even in an Age of Armor of Contempt, putting things that don't have an invuln on a 6-up, and then against pretty much anything else, not getting a save unless they've got an invuln. And then D3 plus 3 damage, your upper end is still a 6, you're not losing out there, but your minimum's a 4, which means even against something like, say, a Dreadnought with -1 damage, you're still guaranteeing 3. You can be pretty clear-cut on, right, it's got 6 wounds left, got 2 Plague Spitters, hitting on 3s, might get 3 of them through, wounding on 3s, might get 2 of them through. It's a 6-up save, they're dealing a minimum of 3 each. I'm happy with that. I'm going to put all 4 into the Dreadnought or whatever it is. Obviously, that scenario is not going to line up all the time, but the fact that it's D3 plus 3 does allow you to make a more reasoned competitive decision than if it's as swingy as D6. So I love it when we get to see the flat damage or D3 plus something. So there's a bit of swing, but there's also a bit of consistency. And then the Plague Burst Mortar is 48-inch, can fire out of range, but do bear in mind there are penalties for the barrage rule, you know, shooting out a line of sight. So it's not quite as effective when you're doing that. It is heavy D6, strength 8, AP -2, damage 2, and is blast. So you'll get your minimum 3 hits on a squad of 6, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, the Plague Burst Mortar there does allow you to hide it out of line of sight of something that might be very threatening, but still be able to shoot back at an infantry squad that you might need to remove, whilst putting the entropy cannons into something else or whatever you might want to do. Typically, I would look to try and get it into line of sight for that, because taking the penalty as a result of being out line of sight does diminish the quality of the weapon. But again, being strength 8, it's generally a good break point. There are a few models now that aren't going to be as upset by strength 8 attacks, but again, if it's not that specific kind of toughness 9 model, then you're in a really good spot. AP -2, it's a good amount against anything with an invuln. AP 2 is more or less where you want to be. Obviously, with Armour of Contempt factions, it's going down to AP 1. You could augment that with maybe a Ferric Blight if you're the inexorable, but I don't think it's really needed. I think you just take it on the troops where you can, and then you can focus whatever the rest of your army needs to do on something else. Personally, because I'd run bloat drones, I would have the bloat drones hunting anything that wants to get on that central objective. You know, might not be looking to get onto it this turn, but what are those cultists doing? They're going to do an action over there, then try and come in the middle. Let's go and chew them up before they can finish that action. But the Plague Burst Crawler would be looking to hit the sort of further target, possibly taking out of line of sight if you have to. And obviously, it does need to be said that whatever you're doing, the order you do it in does matter and does affect what decisions you'll make. So, you know, take what I've said there with a pinch of salt. That scenario won't necessarily come up for you. And then besides those main weapons, you've got a choice of either the Heavy Slugger or the Rot Hail Volley Gun. So the Heavy Slugger is 36-inch Heavy 4. The Rot Hail Volley Gun is 24-inch Rapid Fire 3. So it will get 6 shots if you're within 12. I never want my Plague Burst Crawler within 12, so I take the Heavy Slugger. However, there is the downside that the Rot Hail Volley Gun is strength 6, where the Heavy Slugger is only strength 5, but you do guarantee 4 shots. In some matchups, strength 6 is very relevant, so you may wish to tweak that if you know what you're coming up against or what you're trying to prepare against in the field. But otherwise, they're both AP -1, damage 1. Little bit of tracer fire either way around. I take the Heavy Slugger just because it's the same range as the entropy cannons, and I'm happy with just flat 4 attacks rather than, you know, risking trying to get into 12 to take extra shots with the Rot Hail Volley Gun, or just taking the extra 3 shots when that is the case. So there's no points change to either of those, or no change to the cost of the model for either of those. They're interchangeable, so you can pick what you like. In terms of abilities, we've got Disgusting and Resilient, reducing damage by 1. Contagions and Nurgle. It's demonic, so it's got a 5-up invuln. And when this model is destroyed, roll 1d6. On a 6, it explodes, and each unit within 6 suffers d3 mortal wounds. So it is a fiery explosion, not a Nurgle explosion. Downside being it can hurt you, Upside, it can hurt Abaddon. So there we go. So from here, the rest of these units, one thing that needs to be mentioned is that they are referred to as Chaos Land Raider, Chaos Predator, etc. However, the Chaos Space Marine Codex recently dropped, and their profiles are different despite having a very similar, if not identical, name. Now, there is a points difference between the two, anywhere from sort of 20 to 30 points, I believe, without looking at every single one. And I think that is confirmation that the Death Guard Daemon Engines we're about to cover will not be seeing a toughness increase or any of the changes that the Chaos Space Marine Codex gives to those legions and factions, because Death Guard is in its own codex. It is what it is. This is what we've got. They don't want you to have to, like, you know, errata the back end of the data sheets because they've released a different codex that by rights is nothing to do with Death Guard. The points are lower. You don't get the Chaos Space Marine stuff. You get what's in here, which isn't overwhelmingly good. I do feel for you if you've got the models. I considered running a Chaos Land Raider back in 8th, but I didn't bother in the end because Plagueburst Crawlers are better in my opinion, despite not being transports. However, if you've got the models, it's not to say that they're trash. It's just that I don't think they are point for point as good as a Plagueburst Crawler or even a Blight Hauler, which fills a very similar role other than the Land Raider being a transport, in that they are relatively fast for the army, they are big damage gun platforms, and they're fairly tough, and they're not any less tough than any of these. In fact, they're tougher if you bake in the fact that the Blight Hauler has a 5-up invuln, and these guys don't. So for me, there's no reason to run any of these over a Blight Hauler other than you have the model and you want to run it, in which case, fair play to you. So, first and foremost, Chaos Land Raider is 245 points, and then you can slap on a Combi Bolter for 5 points, Combi Flamer, Melter, or Plasma for 10, and a Havoc Launcher for a further 5. Chaos Land Raider has 16 wounds, toughness 8, it's strength 8, which doesn't diminish. Weapon skill is a 6-up, so very similar vehicle things as you'd expect. So it does bracket, goes down to his next bracket at 8 remaining, and then 4 remaining. So 16 total, it's half and then a quarter. Quite straightforward with this one. Not as favourable bracket as with the Plagueburst Crawler. 3-up weapon skill goes down to 4-up and then 5-up with the brackets. 10-inch movement goes down to 5 and then 3 with the brackets. So sincerely missing out there, in my opinion, with the amount of movement it goes down. I mean, we're going half and then half again, effectively. With the Plagueburst, we're going 9, then 6, so we're losing, 30%, and then another 33% in both cases. So very, very detrimental on the bracket in there. The only other change is the number of attacks, which honestly makes no difference. If you're using the Land Raider as melee attacks and expecting to get kills, I don't know about what to say about that really, besides it's a bad idea. Leadership 9, it does have a 2-up save. So the one thing in the favour of the Chaos Land Raider is it has a 2-up save, but again, it is nearly twice the cost of a Plagueburst Crawler, the Chaos Space Marine version being more expensive on top. So the model is equipped with a twin heavy bolter and 2 twin las cannons, and then of course you can put the combi bolter and the havoc launcher on top. The twin heavy bolter, so it's 36-inch heavy 6, strength 5, AP -1, damage 2. Damage 2, of course, great for killing a variety of models, characters, infantry of any kind, monsters even, but AP -1, in an Age of Armour of Contempt, you're not expecting to push many of them through, and against most big monsters, they're still going to have a reasonable save against that, so not a fantastic weapon in my opinion, the heavy bolter. The las cannons on the other hand, so you've got 2 twin las cannons, so you've got 4 shots. Downside being against things that reduce the number of shots by 1, like the Blight Haulers, twin las cannons really feel the pain because they half the shots. But obviously, unless you're up against a mirror, you're not going to have somebody do that with a Blight Hauler. The profile, of course, strength 9, AP -3, D6 damage. So kind of swingy. It's good strength, of course, but kind of swingy. Not brilliant AP in the Age of Armour Contempt. And, you know, when you roll a 1 on the damage, it's just a wasted command point reroll, basically. Unless you haven't got the CP because of Nephilim, in which case then you're stuck with the 1 and you cry your 250 plus points away. The Havoc Launcher is Heavy D6 Blast, Strength 5, AP minus 0, Damage 1. You don't often see Havoc Launchers get much done unless it's against the Chaffee unit, in which case, fine. And then Combi Bolter is going to be Rapid Fire 2, Strength 4, AP 0, Damage 1. Nothing to write home about either. Does have Contagions of Nurgle and does explode. It's a 6-inch explosion dealing D6 mortal wounds. The one thing on the upside of the Land Raider is you can kind of use it like a, you know, what's the word that I want to use without saying a word that probably isn't terms of service friendly. They can be a martyr. That's an appropriate enough word. So you can drive them into the opponent, go, yeah, come on, attack me. We can still shoot you while you're in engagement range anyway. Come on, attack me. And then they blow up and, you know, D6 mortal wounds to many of your opponent's units could be devastating. So there is a use case for them for that, if nothing else. Can transport 10 Plague Company Bubonic Astartes infantry. So they've got to be the same Plague Company. And each Terminator or Death Guard would take up 2 spaces instead. So 5 Plague Marines or 5 Terminators or Possessed. Personally, I don't think you need to do this. I think if you want to transport Plague Marines, a Rhinos are probably a better shout. It's cheaper, it's going to be easier to fit in the list. And I don't think that the guns the Land Raiders bring into bear are worth the additional points for the Land Raider. Just take a Rhino and some Blight Haulers. That'd be a better shout. Next up, we've got the Chaos Predator Annihilator. So again, it brackets 11 wounds at the top, brackets on 5, and then on 2. It's got a 12-inch move to begin with, then down to 6, then down to 3. 6 up weapon skill, as usual. 3 up ballistic skill, then down to 4, then down to 5. Same with the Land Raider, by the way, if I didn't mention that. Strength 6, not really going to matter. Toughness 7, so not as good as the Chaos Space Marine ones. 11 wounds, a number of attacks, doesn't really matter. Leadership 8, 3 up save. And the Chaos Predator Annihilator is equipped with a twin las cannon. You can upgrade it with 2 heavy bolters or 2 las cannons. And you can have a combi and a Havoc Launcher. So we've already discussed the combi and Havoc Launcher. They're not getting a lot of work done, but they are quite cheap. It's fair enough just to chuck them on for when they can be relevant. Effectively, this is bringing you 4 las cannons instead of the 6 on the Chaos Land Raider and no heavy bolter, because I wouldn't recommend taking the heavy bolters on it. So you got 4 las cannons instead of 6, no transport capacity, less wounds, less toughness, but it's less than half the cost. If you're putting 2 las cannons on it, it is 155. So it's not quite half. It's, you know, 2/3 of the cost, but it feels like a better package to me. I think if I had a choice between a Chaos Land Raider and an Annihilator with a bloat drone, or, you know, something like, or squad of Poxwalkers, I'd probably take the latter more often than not. 4 las cannon shots, you know, it'll do something, but it's nothing really to write home about. It's got Contagions of Nurgle, does explode on a 6, dealing D3 mortal wounds, so it can hurt your own forces, and if you're running it with all las cannons, it probably will, because it'll be, you know, at deep range. If your opponent manages to strike in and kill it, it might not be near anything, but if it is, it's going to be near your stuff. So you might deal yourself some damage there. And then we've got the Predator Destructor. The main difference is that the main gun is the Predator Autocannon. Everything else is the same. Predator Autocannon is 2d3 shots, strength 7, AP minus 3, AP minus 1, damage 3. 3 damage per shot is nice. That's really good for killing pretty much any elite infantry. However, AP minus 1, maybe against orcs, you'll be alright, but against pretty much everything else, you're not going to expect to push many shots, and it's 2d3, which isn't phenomenal. So again, Predator Destructor is 130 plus 2 lots of 20 for the las cannon, so 170. I think you can do a lot better than that. And then we've got the Defiler. Does he change? Well, I don't know if he's changed, but we've got the points. So the Defiler, the big crab man. Defiler has a Defiler Cannon, Reaper Auto Cannon, Twin Heavy Flamer, and Defiler Claws. Starts at 14 wounds, brackets at 7 and 3. So again, it's kind of half and a quarter. Movement is 8, then down to 6, then down to 4. Your opponent will shoot them straight away, and they will be bracketed, so don't count on them moving more than 6. The weapon skill and ballistic skill does change as well with the brackets, sadly. It's a 3 up on the top, then a 4 up, then a 5 up. So again, if you're not going first, expect to be using them on a 4 up because your opponent will shoot them. They are strength 8, but sadly only toughness 7. 5 attacks, leadership 8, and a 3 up save. They are demonic, so they have a 5 up invuln as well. And they do have armor of contempt because the Heretic Astartes, as everything else so far we've discussed is. So the Defiler Cannon is the big one. 72-inch, heavy D6, strength 8, AP -2, damage 3. It's a good anti-tank weapon. It's a bit swingy in the number of shots, you know, only in the same way as a Redemptor Dreadnought is, but with way bigger range. If you want to, you can hide it at the back for a little bit, but I'd argue that for the 165 plus points, you're paying for melee potential. If you don't use it, you might as well have picked something that's just the dedicated gun platform, like a Plague Burst Crawler. So yeah, I mean, I think sitting at the back and trying to make use of that 72-inch range, not that you need that much, but trying to make use of that, I think, is a bit of a waste. Reaper Autocannon is 36-inch, heavy 4, strength 7, AP -2, damage 1. It's a fine profile, but again, in an Age of Armor Contempt, AP -2 is not brilliant, damage 1's not brilliant, but at least it doesn't get reduced by 1 by anything with that rule. Strength 7's a nice place to be, and 4 attacks at least is consistent. The Twin Heavy Flamer is, as you'd expect, 12-inch, heavy 2d6, auto hits, strength 5, AP -1, damage 1. And the Defiler Claws are strength ×2, so 16. So it does have melee potential, you can't deny this. Strength 16, AP -3, d6 damage. So if it does manage to get there without being blown to bits, which is difficult because it's a big model to hide, but certain maps will have enough obscuring that you can be behind it and not be seen from enough angles that it's relevant. If you can do that and get him across the board into something meaty, then strength 16, AP -3, d6 damage with 5 attacks is pretty nice. Now, you can replace the Heavy Flamer with a Havoc Launcher or a Defiler Scourge. I wouldn't bother taking the Havoc Launcher. I think the Heavy Flamer does a lot more work than the Havoc Launcher. Again, it's strength 5, AP 0, damage 1, so it's worse. Granted, it is longer range, but I think you want to get up close to use the melee, so I think the Flame is reasonable. The alternative being the Defiler Scourge. So the Defiler Scourge is an additional melee weapon on top of the claws. Each time the bearer fights, you can make an additional 3 attacks with this weapon. It's at strength +4, so strength 12, AP -2, damage 2. So you're not going to want, it's not like when you're giving a model a weapon that you go, oh, it actually wants to use this all of the time. Like, say, Lightning Claws on just like a normal, like a Vanguard vet. If you got the Lightning Claws and the sword, you do all the attacks on the Lightning Claws except the one that has to go on the sword. Whereas this is something you're taking just to do those extra 3 attacks. So if you don't think you're going to get the value out of the Heavy Flamer, you can take the Scourge and have 3 additional attacks, which certainly have a far better profile in my opinion. Strength 12, AP -2, damage 2. You would expect to be pushing some damage through to pretty much any infantry unit. Armor of Contempt obviously brings that down to AP -1, but with 3 attacks, you'd still probably expect to push 1 through. So that seems alright. The Reaper Autocannon can be swapped out with a Twin Heavy Bolter or a Twin Las Cannon. I don't think the Twin Heavy Bolter is a good pick in the Age of Armor Contempt. There's just nothing that it's really brilliant at dealing with. And then the Twin Las Cannon, of course, we've already discussed those profiles. They're exactly the same. I would take the Twin Las Cannon because, of course, you've already got the long range in the Defiler Cannon. The Las Cannon means you're most likely shooting both of those weapons turn 1, as long as your opponent's army isn't all very concealed behind obscuring. But in 2,000 points, it's quite hard to hide everything. And it can be equipped with a Combi Bolt, a Combi Flame, a Combi Melter, or Combi Plasma. So the model itself is 165. You'll pay an additional 5 for the combi bolter, an additional 10 for the other combi weapons. Oh, in fact, sorry, the Defiler Scourge is an additional 10 points. Sorry, I missed it tucked away in there. So you're swapping the Flamer for 15 down to 5 for down by 5 for the Defiler Scourge. So it is cheaper than the Heavy Flamer, but that's because you're paying for the Heavy Flamer. I noticed that there, but didn't see the Scourge. The Heavy Bolter, if you wanted it, is the same cost as the Scourge. I think they're kind of even, but I think I'd probably take the Scourge. But overall, I think the Flamer for the additional 5, so 15 for the Flamer, I think is worth that. And then the Reaper autocannon's built in, but the las cannon is 20 points for the twin las cannon. So the way I would probably run it is the las cannons and the Flamers. Probably wouldn't bother with a combi bolter on top. So it's 165, plus 15 is 180, plus 20, 200 points. I just don't think it gets as much done as 10 Plague Marines now in this day and age, if I'm honest. With the way the secondaries work and wanting to really do those actions, I just don't think having a bullet magnet like a Defiler for 200 points in the list is that good of an idea. So as far as the heavy support slot, the Plagueburst Crawler is an obvious pick. I feel like it slots into every list. There's always room for a little bit more anti-tank. You could maybe shave a member of the squad off one of your infantry squads. Maybe say your Death Shroud, shave one of them off. Maybe cut another unit and you go, right, I've got room for a Plagueburst Crawler, which is going to deal with the anti-tank from range. Now the Death Shroud can go after whatever else, the characters or whatever you might fancy going for. So I think the Plagueburst Crawler fills a great role in any army. It's not that good that you have to take it. I've run a Death Guard list without Plagueburst Crawlers for a while, and I think the Blight Haulers do a very similar job. I think a squad of 3 of them is generally enough, but if you feel you need more anti-tank, the Plagueburst Crawler is the way to go. The other options, I mean, if you really want a Land Raider, by all means take it, but I think they're too expensive for what they offer in this army. And the others, I think they're just not good enough at what they do. They're just a big target saying, yeah, shoot me, because you'll get good trades with your anti-tank weapons, and you'll waste the Death Guard players' points. So I think realistically, if you're taking a vehicle, you have to be confident that you can handle hiding it and not using it some turns where relevant, or that it can survive what it's up against. And of any of them, the Plagueburst Crawler wins that argument hands down, and it doesn't even really lose the output match against any of them, because again, bearing in mind, the Defiler and the Chaos Land Raider are both significantly more than the Plagueburst Crawler. So if you imagine you're kind of getting 1 and a bit Plagueburst Crawlers for that, there'd be an extra few shots involved or whatever, in which case I think it compares very favourably with any of your other options. Onto the dedicated transport. So there's only the Rhino here, I'm pretty sure. Yep, only the Rhino. Now, given the way that Plague Marines have changed and you can upgrade them now for free, you can go full melee Plague Marines, and there's no massive disincentive for that, in that they are already fairly tough. They are quite slow, but again, I mean, if they're all melee, you can advance every turn without much penalty if you know you're not going to be in range to charge. So certainly turn 1, you can just advance, and in theory, it's not that big of a problem being slow at that stage. However, if you want to get them further up the board that bit quicker and into the enemy's front line, rather than hold the central objective and just get shot at a bit, then a Rhino can be a really good way to do that. It does bracket, so he's got 10 wounds, goes down to the bracket, mid bracket at 5, and then bottom bracket at 2, so it's half and then a quarter basically. 12-inch movement at full, and then when it's bracketed, it goes down to 6. Hopefully by that point, you've got the movement value out of it. You're at least going to get 1 turn if you hide it a bit, and if you hide it, it's not that hard to deal damage to, but if you hide it, you'll at least get 1 turn out of the movement, maybe 2 if you're lucky on saves, but your opponent will target it if it's still got the Marines in it. Once they've left, it actually becomes more valuable in my opinion, because it acts as obscuring if they're right behind it, and they kind of have to shoot it to come through it, because that you might be able to block like an avenue if it's a kind of like an urban sort of map. You can put in widthways and make it impossible for other vehicles to come through. And if they are, say, dreadnoughts, and their plan was to come up close to you and punch you a bit, then they're going to have to punch through the Chaos Rhino first. And it does, of course, explode, dealing D3 mortal wounds within 6. So it may even get a bit back on the mortal wounds when it is dead. It can have a combi bolter and it can have a havoc launcher. Doesn't really matter. They're not going to get an awful lot of work done. Maybe they'll kill a troop or two, but that isn't why you're bringing them. You're bringing them because they're a dedicated transport. It has contagion to Nurgle, and it can transport 10 Plague Marines. Cannot transport Terminators or Possessed. But again, the reason you'd run a Rhino is because you've got a squad of 10 and you want to move them up the board to get them in melee as quick as possible. I think, given the points decreases across the board, it is worth it now. 80 points for the Land Raider. You've got a combi bolter on there. You can take an additional for another 5, and you can take the combi others for 10 points, and Havoc Launcher for 5. So yeah, I mean, best she gets 2 combi weapons. One of them is a combi bolter and a Havoc Launcher. I just don't think you need to rely on that. I mean, it could be relevant to take a combi melter for 10 extra points. I don't mind that. That does at least give it some punch at close range, but it most likely is getting killed before it gets in range of that. It's there just to be extra wounds for the Plague Marines. And sadly, if it does explode, then of course it could end up killing a few of them on their disembarkation. So yeah, it's a bit risky, but I think it is more reasonable now than it was before the points change, because the average Death Guard army's probably gone down about 100 or so points. So you know, you can fit another 80 in. If you've already got everything you wanted, maybe you want a Rhino now, you can move some up the board. And then the last thing there is the fortification, the I always get this wrong, Miasmic Malignifier. So it does have brackets. All that does is affect the strength, which doesn't actually matter because it doesn't have a melee attack. It does have ballistic skill, but that doesn't matter because it's auto hits. Doesn't have weapon skill. So I don't know why they've given it a strength. I don't know why it brackets. Maybe that's a hangover of an old rule. Or maybe it's so that like other factions, like if it's bracketed, you deal more damage or something. I don't know if that's a thing. But I can't see why it's bracketed for the purposes of itself. It must just be to affect other rules. But either way around, it's got 12 wounds. Doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter as far as you're concerned whether it brackets. Doesn't change how it works. It has a Noxious Stink, which is a 6-inch range, heavy 2d6, strength 4, AP -1, damage 1. Each time an attack's made with a weapon, it automatically hits the target. Not a plague weapon though, interestingly. So no reroll ones. Maybe that's just because it's a fortification though. It's got Disgustingly Resilient, got Contagion to Nurgle. It has a Toxic Presence. This model counts the battle round as being 4 for the purposes of contagion range. So it's always got a 9-inch contagion. So ultimately the point being, you can pop this down and there's a bubble where if your opponent goes in it, they're -1 toughness. You can kind of deny them that area of the board unless they're willing to take that penalty. And it means you don't need to get units over there if your intention was just to reduce the toughness on something to light it up with the Plague Burst Crawlers or what have you. So kind of useful in that regard. Putrescent Fog. While the Death Guard infantry is within 6, it receives light cover. If it was already in light cover, then it basically receives dense. It -1 from the hit roll. Seeded Growths. During deployment, you can set up this model anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 12 away from the enemy deployment zone and any enemy models. So if your opponent can deploy, like with infiltrators or something, then you probably want to get it down sooner rather than later so they can't screen you out of the board. But otherwise, if they're not deploying mid-board, then you can just put it in last and see how you go. Just sort of see where you think they're going to be moving up from and then place it in what you feel is probably the most obstructive position. Pox Furnace is another ability. Pox Furnace is an obstacle terrain feature with the following terrain traits described in the 40k rulebook. Light cover, heavy cover, unstable position, difficult ground. If the miasmic magnifier is destroyed, its pox furnace is also removed. So essentially, not only is it in and of itself potentially a roadblock for bigger models on certain parts of certain maps, it also does -1 toughness, and it comes with another difficult ground pipe to lay somewhere, and presumably on your opponent's side of things, so that they're going to have to come through that choke point with some models, and that's going to slow them down. The fortification is 75 points. Don't think you need it. We've discussed it, but I don't think you need it. I've never felt like I needed it. They are cool. I like them. I like them for the concept of like a recorded battle report, you know, channels doing that. I'd love to do that myself at some point, but, you know, one step at a time. Ultimately, I think for those sorts of games, it can be really fun and really fluffy, particularly a narrative game. I think I'd probably try and fit one in if I'd, you know, fit the narrative around it. But other than that, you just don't really need it. Terminators, whatever flavour you want to bring, you'll probably be bringing some Terminators. They can strike in and get the contagion in the mid-board, so you don't need it on that regard. Acting as a roadblock can be useful, but it's not useful against every army. Certainly things like Gene Stealers aren't going to have a problem with it. And really anything that goes infantry heavy wouldn't really have that much of a problem with it. It might soak up a few shots for you, but beyond being a bit of a bullet sponge and not even that good of one, I don't think you need to spend 75 points on that. Just take 15 Poxwalkers instead. Well, that is the codex covered as far as datasheets. We will next move on to the stratagems. Now, previously when I did this series, I went through every single stratagem, but I think what I'm going to do is go through the codex and look at stratagems that apply to those units, or to certain units at certain stages of the game. So we'll talk about the requisition phase in the way that it is, and then when we look at the command phase, we'll look at, right, in your command phase, these sort of things are what's going to go on with these certain units. Rather than, this is the name of the stratagem, this is what it does, is it good? Because I felt like that was probably a bit more, or a bit less entertaining. So hopefully the way I'm going to do it this time will be a bit more so. Thank you so much for everybody that's got involved. Really, really do appreciate it. So please do continue to do that. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.